Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another evening of Fireside Chat for US in the City. We're really excited this evening to welcome award-winning journalist and the new face of the Jewish Chronicle, its new editor, and my brother-in-law, Jake Wallis Simons. Jake, good evening.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I thought we'd have now about 3/4 of an hour of an intimate chat about you, your life, your career, and your perspective on all things Jewish and our community, and also world events, because I know that's really at the heart of your interest, and it has been so for decades now. So it's always good as well, having interviewed the likes of Sherry Blair, Lord Panic, and Ed Hussein, others, that we have someone who actually sang at my chuppah for once. So, that's really nice. So I guess for everyone watching at home, we're going to just have a chat and find out more about Jake and find out more about what he thinks and his perspective on current events and what's going on in our community. So I guess we'll start with your background. Tell us a bit about your formative years and the kind of the interests that grabbed you in your intellectual pursuits growing up.
Well, thank you, Johnny, and welcome to everybody who's watching. It's quite strange that you can see me and I can't see you. All I can see is my computer and a small dot, which is the cameras. But I trust that you're there, and and you're all very welcome. And thank you very much for having me. In my formative years, well, I was in the Orthodox community for my childhood, the majority of my childhood. And I think that gave me a lasting sense of warmth and understanding of the Orthodox way of life. But after leaving school, I went my own way and found my own sense of identity as a Jew and as an individual. And that didn't involve Orthodox Judaism, although of course Judaism is key to my every breath and how I see the world. After traveling a bit, I went to Oxford for a few years. I studied English at St. Peter's College, which interestingly has been at the center of a couple of scandals, including inviting Ken Loach to give a controversial speech. And also it was at the heart of the Mosley scandal, if you recall, from a few weeks ago. But that's by the by. And after St. Peter's, I became a novelist, wrote a total of four books. The best of them, or I suppose the least unsuccessful of them, perhaps, is it's called The English German Girl, which was about the Kindertransport, which maybe people have read, and if they haven't, I want to know why not. But then I went from writing fiction to going into the world of journalism, and beginning at my career at the Telegraph as a features writer, and at the Times as well, also on features. I made my way through to news. I was at CNN for about a year or so, did stuff for the BBC, eventually wound up at the Mail, where I was basically a foreign correspondent for 5 years, traveling around the world and reporting on the biggest stories of the day. And from there, I ended up washing up at the JC, and I'm just so proud to be editor of such a fondly regarded title, and indeed the oldest Jewish paper in the world.
It's incredible, a varied career. I guess you've always had a spiritual yearning. When we first met, when we first met, you were, I guess, more involved in Eastern traditions, but I think that you've always been searching. I think that I've seen that in your literature and your writing and your journalism. There's always been a search to get to the bottom of things. None so clearly as in 2019. I think many people will have heard of the Corbyn English irony scandal, but fewer people know it was you who uncovered that story.
Yeah, I'm not sure that necessarily the search for the spiritual search is for truth is the same as the journalistic search for truth? That's an interesting question. I feel like the spiritual search for truth perhaps derives from it involves a different part of you. I think it's a contemplative part. It's got to do with your own sense of what brings meaning to your life. Whereas I think the search for truth from a journalistic point of view is a far more externalized search, and looking for facts and looking for the reality that's that by definition is an objective truth. And so for me, the two things perhaps activate different elements of my personality. Having said that, you mentioned the English irony story. That when I broke that, it was almost bringing the two together, because when I did a lot of reporting on Corbyn over that period, and I sort of broke many of the key stories, and was I believe I was either the first or one of the first people to start the ball rolling on Corbyn reporting with regard to anti-Semitism. And for me, that was almost a fusion of the two, because it was intellectual and it was journalistic, and I was seeking the truth, an objective truth. But it also had a sense, almost, I think spiritual is too much, but it certainly had a profound sense. It animated my sense of right and wrong on a moral scale, on the level of not just individual identity, but on an ethical level, I suppose. And so I remember what happened with that story was that somebody sent me a footage of Jeremy Corbyn appearing at a conference alongside various Islamists and either people who were either terrorists or terrorist adjacent at this conference in London. So got this footage. I did the story. Corbyn appears alongside. It was one of many stories of Corbyn appears alongside, and the question in the public's mind, it convinced some people that he was beyond the pale, but a lot of people felt, okay, he's with this person, but what does he actually think? Maybe he's just making peace, Anyway, so it was another appeared alongside story. At the time, I was thinking, well, you do enough of these stories, people begin to think, if you lie down with pigs, maybe there's a reason for it. I spoke to the person who sent me the footage, and I said, have you watched it? Is there anything in there I should know about? He said, I've watched it. There's nothing that comes up. There's nothing that's of any interest. It was just a regular speech. It was more who he's alongside that's the story. So I did the story like that, but I hadn't published it yet. And I thought, well, just for the sake of thoroughness, maybe I should watch through Jeremy Corbyn's speech, which itself is a labour. I mean, watching any Jeremy Corbyn speech is a labour. And not with a capital L, although that's a contested point, perhaps. Anyway, but it's a hard job. And I watched it through to the end, and at the end, he said that comment, which was that maybe Zionists don't understand English irony, something along those lines. And when I heard that, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I just knew that was the story. And I redid the story about. So if you read the original story now, you'll see that most of it's about who he was alongside, but the top bit's about the comments that he made. Did the story like that. Got some quotes. I remember ringing Stephen Pollard, who at the time was editor of the JC, and I was at the Mail, and got some comments from him. And I remember saying to him, "Look, this is big," on the phone. And I feel like that story was from one point of view, it was one among many for Corbyn. Sorry, Johnny, I'll just speak one more minute, then you can ask another question. But from one point of view, it was one among many, but it was a key moment in the Corbyn saga, because it was the moment when people actually got to look at footage and see Jeremy Corbyn say something anti-Semitic with his own mouth. They saw the words come out, they saw the attitude. It was no longer a case of who he was standing with on which platform and how who he described as friends or whatever it was. It was him saying something that British Jews, British Zionists don't understand English irony. I think he said they might have lived here all their lives, they might have been born here, but they still don't understand English irony. In other words, they're not really British. They are other, which is the essence of a racist worldview, you know. And I feel like at that point, there was different constituencies of people. There were some people who would never be persuaded that Corbyn was an anti-Semite because they just loved him too much. There are other people who were persuaded already from the first bits of evidence because they were sensible. Then there were people in the middle who could be persuaded either way. And I felt that at that moment, with that story, we persuaded the people who were wavering. And after that, it was just reinforcing the message and sort of driving it home with the constituency of people who were against him. And eventually that led to 12th of December 2019, when he was finally dumped by the British electorate. And I've got to say that I felt that I played some small part in that defeat.
Isn't the 12th your birthday as well?
It is, yeah. By coincidence.
Good. No, it was an incredible piece of journalism, actually, and obviously the reverberations of that were felt throughout the British media, and it came to define part of that run up to that election. And then I guess during the pandemic, wasn't it? It was during the pandemic, 2021. You were appointed. You joined the JC, and subsequently appointed editor. There's a huge community mouthpiece. It's also, it's something that binds the community together. You get your chopped liver and your JC on a Friday, and it's been part of our community culture for decades. What's your vision for the paper, Jewish journalism in general, and the role of the JC, and what's been your vision for the paper?
Good question. I think that what I'm trying to do with the paper has two elements to it. The first is with regard to the community, and my objective with the community is to make the Jewish Chronicle a broad synagogue, I suppose. In which every denomination of Jew, every Jews of every political persuasion can find a home and can feel represented, and feel like their concerns and their daily lives and their interests and their tastes are reflected in our publication, so that it really feels like it's authentically of the community. So whether it's Orthodox or Reform or liberal or non-religious, whether it's Haredi or not Haredi, my objective is to get as many people into the tent as possible. And of course, I'm not going to necessarily be successful in getting everybody in, but I'm going to try and open the doors as widely as possible and make everybody feel comfortable. So, I'm just not interested in making people feel unwelcome or getting involved with disputes here and there. All I want to do is make everybody feel welcome and represented in the pages of the JC. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
But the second element is that I am making the JC count on the national and international stage, by the caliber of stories that we are breaking and the caliber of writing and the caliber of output in general, to try to make the mainstream media, both in Britain and even overseas, sit up and take notice of our stories. And the reason for that is that I'm building a small but very accomplished team based on my Fleet Street contacts and experience. That yes, we can't cover the same breadth of subjects that the Mail on Sunday or the Guardian or the Observer or the Times would cover, but we can bring the same mentality and expertise to bear on small stories that matter to us. And the ones that matter to us are the ones, hopefully, that matter to JC readers and Jews in general. So let me give you an example. One of the biggest stories that we've got in the last few months was related to the Texas siege. Do you remember the Texas synagogue siege? So this lad from Blackburn flew over to America and decided to go to a synagogue and take hostages, and eventually was killed by police. So, story of international terror with British roots. We managed to get the audio of the phone conversation that the gunman had during the siege with his brother back in Britain, in which his brother tried to persuade him not to do it. He ranted about his reason for doing it, eventually rang off, and shortly after was killed. So we got that audio footage, and in getting that audio, I won't go into the details of how we got it, but we got it. Suffice to say that we were competing against every other Fleet Street title of note to get that scoop, and we got it. And it was followed, as we say. It was the story was also presented in all of the other papers. It led the Today program the following day. It achieved international coverage. But the important thing about it was that was a story that mattered to us more than anybody else. And the reason for that was that at that moment in the news cycle, the way in which various media organizations, the biggest media organizations in Britain, were reporting the story was to downplay the anti-Semitic intent of the Blackburn-born gunman. So rather than say that a guy from Blackburn, Islamist, radicalized, travels across the world to take Jews hostage in a synagogue, and that's an anti-Semitic act, which seems a pretty straightforward thing to demonstrate, they were saying anti-Semitism didn't play a part. He had mental health issues. All anti-Semites had mental health issues, right? I mean, Hitler had mental health issues. That's a given. That's not the point. It's not an excuse. It doesn't downplay it. So the way in which the thing was being presented was almost felt as if the media coverage was trying to find as many excuses as possible to exempt him from this accusation of anti-Semitism when the guy had gone to a synagogue and held hostages. So when we got that audio footage, in his own words, he was describing anti-Semitic theories and he was ranting about Jews and so forth. And so we presented that scoop in such a way that reminded the public and the world indeed that this was an anti-Semitic event. And look, to our readers and to the Jewish community in Britain, if an anti-Semitic terror attack is presented as if it was not anti-Semitic, that affects us. It affects how we feel about ourselves and our position in British society, and how our concerns, how seriously our concerns are taken, and how valid we are in Britain. And so I feel that story was not just another story for the Sun and the Mail and the Times who were going for the story, but for us it mattered. And so I guess there's a slightly long-winded way of saying that what I'm trying to do is to make the JC a broad church for all Jews, but then through our journalism make a difference to the national and international narrative on matters that directly affect us and our sense of self in this country.
Yeah, it's very two important goals there. But there have been other stories that you've broken through the lens of the JC that have been beyond the community. I think in particular the Iran story. Can you elaborate on that particular one that was highly coveted?
Yes, I think you're talking about the story that I broke February, almost over a year ago now, February 2021, which was a story about the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was the preeminent Iranian nuclear scientist, who was really the brains behind Iran's nuclear program, who was mysteriously assassinated I believe it was November 2021. Of course, nobody took responsibility for it. But I suppose through contacts that I built up and the just doing the job that I've been doing over the years, I was able eventually to get the true story behind that assassination, which was that it was carried out by the Mossad using a remote controlled machine gun that weighed a ton because it had explosive in it that caused it to self-destruct, and was smuggled into Iran over a period of some months by a piece by piece by a team of joint Israeli and Iranian operatives, and some other details as well. So I got that story, and I knew it was of national and global significance. And I joined the JC only 6 weeks or so before, and I guess I could have broken it with any paper, but I just thought that it would be just a wonderful way to start putting the JC on the map and indicating my intentions for the prominence of the paper. So I broke it in the JC, and it kind of caught like wildfire. It was followed around the world. It was featured on the equivalent of the News at 6 and News at 10 in Israel. Obviously, it was covered by Sky extensively, and it was followed a lot in Iran as well. Funnily enough, like we had our web traffic suddenly had a huge spike from the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I remember thinking that if only we were able to take subscriptions from Iran and ship our paper out to there, then we could have improved our subscription rate quite a lot. But anyway, it did very well. And then some months later, the New York Times broke the same story without attributing it to us, which created a bit of an outcry, and so it had a sort of second life then. But yes, it was a big story, and it was good.
Quite some optics. You're seeing people cuddling the JC in the streets of Tehran. That would have been quite something. But obviously you've had a presence on TV as well, reviewing the papers on Sky. But also there was one. I'm not sure if you're able to elaborate or share your reminiscing on it, but on Channel 4 News, when you were interviewed there by Jon Snow about anti-Semitism in Britain, I seem to remember quite a difficult moment, a tense moment when you spoke up. Do you remember that interview, and what were your feelings about it, and what are they now?
I remember the interview a little bit vaguely. It was some time ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, but when you had to say that, it was like, you would say that, wouldn't you? And you said, "I'm British."
Yeah, I think there was a moment when I forget what the context was now. Was there a war going on?
Yeah, and it was the depiction of Israel in that during that conflict, I think.
I think it was a conflict. Maybe it was 2014 or something. I forget now, but there was a conflict going on, and I was on Channel 4 News, and Jon Snow was interviewing me about it. And there was a moment when he said, he sort of it was about Israeli operations and Israeli a war in Israel, and he said, but something like, but you wouldn't do that, would you? Meaning he was associating me with Israel, with the Israelis, that's your, why are you shooting rockets or something like that? I forget exactly what it was, and I had to remind him that I'm not Israeli, I'm British. Yeah, so it was one of those moments where the assumption that of a sort of collectivity of Jews comes out in a slip of the tongue. I mean, there was another moment recently when the story that we've been pushing a lot since the end of last year was the BBC story. Remember the Hanukkah, there was these Chabad kids who were celebrating Hanukkah, and they were accosted by some thugs on Oxford Street, and then they took refuge in the bus in which they came, and the social media footage went. I got it quite early on, and we broke it, and so we were ahead of the story quite a lot. But it became a BBC story because the BBC reported it, suggesting that there was some anti-Islamic slurs on the footage, and that it was 6 of one and half dozen of the other, making that suggestion, and it became this big deal. And the Board of Deputies went and met the BBC, and there was a moment when the BBC, one of the BBC chiefs, Fran Unsworth, who I believe either has left or is leaving soon, made a similar comment to the Board of Deputies President Marie van der Zyl, and she said, "Of course, you've listed the BBC as in your top 10 of anti-Semitic organisations. You're just trying to get at us, aren't you? You're trying to make out as if we're anti-Semitic." And Marie said, "No, we're not trying to make you out as anti-Semitic. We've never called you anti-Semitic." And she said, "Yeah, yes, you have. You've included us on this chart of 10 anti-Semitic organisations, And Marie said, that was the Simon Wiesenthal Centre. That was an American group. We are British Jews. I'm the president of the Board of Deputies. That's nothing to do with us. And there was a sense that from the BBC, there was this attitude coming that, it's just basically Jews trying to get at us, international Jewry trying to bring us down. It was that sort of instinct. I hope I'm not being too unkind to Fran Arnsworth and the BBC when I say that, but that's how it came across to Marie anyway, who later complained. So I think that what you're talking about with Jon Snow was similar, sort of saying that because I'm Jewish, therefore I'm sort of responsible for to speak on behalf of Israel.
There was a moment in your career that I remember because your sister, who I'm married to, and I have often reflected on the highlights. There was an experiment you undertook where you donned a kippah and walked the streets of a European city, and to see how much abuse you might receive, and you filmed it. Can you reflect on that?
Yeah, I think I seem to recall this. Again, this is going back quite a long way. Probably 2014, 2015. But at the time, there was an Israeli journalist, and his name's on the tip of my tongue, but I forget. But anyway, the Israeli journalist, I would credit him if I could remember his name. But he was in Paris, and I think did a similar thing where he was wearing a kippah as an experiment and got beaten up, or at least pursued by thugs. And so myself and a journalist friend of mine thought, well, why don't we try the same thing? So I put a kippah on and walked along around the streets of London, and we even went up to Luton as well. And my friend walked in front of me with a sort of hidden camera pointing backwards in the hope that I would get beaten up. And sadly, I didn't. So we walked all the way around London, went around SOAS and all the places where you think that maybe I'd be targeted. I chose a kippah with a Star of David on it and everything. Went up to Luton and went round all the places where extremists are supposed to hang out, and I just could not get beaten up for love nor money. So it didn't work, I'm afraid.
That's maybe a rare positive in the story of anti-Semitism in the British Isles.
Well, I think the point is that it wasn't a scientific experiment, to put it that way.
So, I mean, in terms of the community now, where we sit now, we're in 2022. Corbyn's that time has sort of passed. We talk about anti-Semitic incidents. The JC is obviously involved in publicising and exposing such incidents. How do you see things in terms of the Jewish place in a modern Britain? Do we have a secure future? What's the climate like out there now? Based on the stories you're receiving and reporting on, how safe is it to be a Jew in Britain today?
That's a big question. I feel like, certainly there are elements that are hostile to Jews in Britain. Don't get me wrong. I mean, campus anti-Semitism was something that was brought up in Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. So prominent has it got. And Andrew Percy, who asked the question of the Prime Minister, cited one of our stories, which was a Jewish student who'd been marked down because of her Jewishness, basically. I think that my overall feeling is that Jews have always, throughout history, lived in environments in which a lot of hostility has been present. Let's put it that way. And I do believe that never in history has there been a society in which Jews have been more comfortable than this. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we don't have our enemies and we don't have our challenges, and that doesn't mean to say that there aren't fights to be had, and anti-Semitism, of course, is a problem that we have to face and try to defeat. But I think that if you take a step back and look at history, I'd rather be a Jew today in Britain than a Jew in Poland 100 years ago. etc., etc. I think that the general feeling that I have about being Jewish in Britain today is that I think that we need to be as proud as we can be and as unapologetic as we can be. And I think that we need to have no hesitation at all about saying to the world that we're British and we're Jewish. And I don't think, I feel like any impulse to hide away, to disguise our faith or our beliefs, to run away, to feel ashamed, to want to close ourselves off in our own small bubbles, I think that's all a great mistake. I think that we have a right to be here, and we have a right that our concerns should be taken seriously, our identity should be taken seriously. And I do believe that our values are ones that that are the heart at the heart of British values and what Britain should be fighting for as much as we should be. And so I think I would, the approach that I try to take is combating anti-Semitism where it exists in Britain, but also trying to align my paper and ourselves as a community with Britain as being squarely part of mainstream British life. We deserve our place here, and we deserve to be taken seriously. And I don't think we should be ashamed of that.
Yeah, it's a powerful point. And I had another question as well about in terms of general politics and that which affects the media every day in terms of cancel culture, woke culture, and how that affects the Jewish community as well. Because we've been through various waves of radicalism, and it seems to me now this idea of I don't know, wokeism or extreme behavior or extreme tendencies. How does that affect being a Jew in Britain, or how does it affect your ability to operate as a journalist with freedom of speech, etc.? How have you wrestled with this particular cultural wave?
I think the first thing to say is that I think it would be a mistake to become, for me as the editor of the JC, to become too much of a culture warrior, as it were, and to sort of become a knee-jerk anti-woke figure. Instead, I think it's more important to just sort of drill down to the values that in which we believe as Jews, and the values in which the country believes, Britain as a whole. Enlightenment values of free speech, values of tolerance, and so forth, and to protect those against threats from any side. And it's true that this word woke, I suppose, that the hard left, there is a deep strain of anti-Semitism winding its way through that cultural segment. That's absolutely true. And it's one that's seeking to influence the sorts of words that we're able to use and the sorts of thoughts we're allowed to think, sort of determining the parameters of debate and conversation. I think that that's regrettable, something that everybody needs to resist. But I think that we need to be open to the fact that there are people of good faith who really care about issues of social justice, and who mustn't be dismissed as being woke and disregarded when they could be they could become friends and allies. And I feel that it's a mistake to be too much of a culture warrior when it comes to this. So I think that really what it comes down to is to focus on our own values, and one of those is tolerance, and to show that tolerance towards people who disagree with us, as much as to those who agree with us. At the same time, not being afraid to stand up against anti-Semitism and bigotry from whatever side it comes.
Absolutely. And I guess lots of aspiring journalists out there, young people in our community, maybe even beyond, who might be listening. What advice would you give a young journalist today trying to make their way down the path you've trodden? I guess what are the pearls of wisdom you've picked up over the years, and can you share any of them with us about how to make it in the journalism field, and I guess your top tips to navigate through this particular path?
I think that there are various different bits of advice that are specific to the sort of journalist you might want to be. I mean, if you want to be a features writer, it's quite different to if you want to be a foreign correspondent or whatever it is. I think that the whole thing boils down to, for me, really, is not to take things at face value. I think that's probably the most important piece of advice that I could give, or the thing that I try to live by. And by that I mean, obviously looking beyond the appearances of things to find out which versions of reality stand up to scrutiny and which don't, which is important. Somebody is proclaiming themselves as an anti-racist, but are they racist? For example. But also, I think, as a journalist, you're constantly trying to do your job and coming up against barriers and boundaries that people put up trying in an attempt to stop you from getting at the story, whether it's not allowing you to speak to this minister, not allowing you into this area, not allowing you access to this information, to those documents, trying to hide behind a spokesman, trying to not issue a journalist visa to this place, or whatever it is. There are many obstacles to doing your job and to getting at the truth. And sometimes those obstacles aren't intentionally put in your way. Sometimes they are obstacles of circumstance. It's happening in a far distant country and it's difficult to get in there because there's a war going on. How do I get in there? And I think the solution to all of those things is to look beyond the face value, look beyond the no, look beyond the obstacle, and to think, what's the way around it? You're not breaking any rules, but what's the way around it? How can I use my initiative to find a different way to get the story, to find a way to access the minister that isn't through the spokesman? How can I get into the house that I've been told I'm not allowed into, although there's no reason why I shouldn't be in it? And I think that sort of reliance on the initiative is really vital. And I can tell a number of anecdotes from all around the world of where that approach has borne fruit. But I think that it's not looking at face value and using your initiative is probably the key quality that a journalist needs.
Can you share any of those initiative taking events or adventures, maybe as a foreign correspondent or maybe any
okay, I'll tell you this. So it's perhaps not the best story in the world, but I was covering I began life as a foreign correspondent in 2015. The second story that I did was the Bataclan attack in Paris. And after that, there were terror. Remember that spate of terror attacks? They were felt like they were every week anyway. I covered the attacks, the Bataclan, then there was Nice, there was Berlin, there was Stockholm, there was Istanbul. There was then later on the Sri Lankan bombings, which I covered over Easter 2018, I think it was. And also I covered it was the migrant stuff. So remember there was the migrant crisis back then. So I covered that from Greece, from Macedonia, from Calais. I reported from Africa. I reported on the fall of Mugabe in Zimbabwe. I reported on the rise of Boko Haram in Nigeria. I reported from Venezuela, of course, from the Middle East. But there was one moment when I remember I was covering, there was an attack in Berlin, terror attack in Berlin. And the news broke quite late at night that there was a particular mosque in which the perpetrators had been planning the atrocity, and they'd gone back there after the attack. And so it seemed to be key in the investigation, but it was revealed about sort of 9 or 10 at night, quite late, came out on the news. So I was with the what we call the press pack, the journalists of different publications from Britain who all sort of congregate together and go and have dinner and drinks and things. And I was with them, and the news broke, and through piecing together a couple of images and clues, I was able to work out where this mosque was. So I went down there. It's by this point, it was about 10:30, 11 at night. And the mosque had been raided by police. So the police had gone, raided it, and left fairly recently. So they hadn't sort of cordoned it off. The door was smashed in. The windows were smashed in. It had been raided. It was dark. And outside there was somebody from Sky, producer. It was like this lone producer standing there, one person, saying, "And you got there? Who are you?" From the Mail. She said, "You can't go in there. There's you're not allowed in there." He said, "Why not?" And they said, "Well, you can't go in there. There's someone in there who's dangerous." So this was a place that was the scene of a police raid. It was a mosque. It was a public place, but it was deserted. And this person was telling me, "Don't go in there." And I just thought, let's give it a go. Let's give it a try. So I got the photographer over. We walked past this producer, walked over to the sort of broken open door, shouted in there, "Anyone in there?" No sound. Went in, lights weren't working, turned my phone on, got the light going, the torch out of the phone, shone it around. The photographer took pictures of the devastation of the police after the police raid. Then there came a moment when there was a sort of a stairway going downwards. And at the bottom of the stairway, there was a closed door. And outside the closed door, there was 2 or 3 pairs of shoes. Shouted down there, "Anyone there?" There was no sound. There were some bullet holes in the wall. I mean, it had been quite a violent raid, and had to make the decision as to whether to go down the stairs and see what was down there, or hold back. So based on what the Sky producer had told me, decided that it really wasn't worth going down there because we had the story, we had the pictures, and so we left. And then the story became this, shortly after that, the police came and cordoned the whole thing off, and it was a crime scene and nobody was allowed in. And the next morning there was pictures of them dragging out this guy who was down in the basement. They dragged him out. He was spitting at everyone. He was quite violent. They arrested him and took him off. I guess the story that we did with the pictures of inside this mosque became quite a big story at that moment. We were in Germany, but the German press bought them off us and followed our story, and it was quite a big hit for us, as it were. I just feel like that's one of the things. It's not the biggest story I've done, but it was a moment when I think it encapsulates the need to be told no, and to look at the disadvantages and difficulties and the dangers, and to think, let's give it a try and make it work. And that spirit, I think, is the thing that really informs any kind of good news journalism.
I guess in the JC terms, it can be distilled into the term chutzpah.
Exactly right. Which perhaps is why I'm okay at my job.
Yeah. So I guess to conclude, obviously we're in the second month of this war now in the Ukraine. Obviously, there's the Zelensky Jewish link. There have been many Jews trapped in Ukraine or hiding or managed to escape. It's dominated the headlines. Are there any elements to the story, any elements to the conflict that you've focused on, or that you could share some insights, with us on, any perspective about, how long this will last for, what's going to be the fallout, what are the motivations behind Russia's plan? You've been reporting on this. Can you share any thoughts, any thoughts that you've had on the conflict?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where, when I joined the JC, that was my first, it was the first significant move away from reporting and to being on the desk. I mean, I've done it a bit in the past, but it was the main. And since being there, there's been a couple of big international events that I've been sitting in the office covering, but not actually been there. There was the Israel offensive in Gaza in May, and on both occasions, old colleagues of mine from different papers have messaged me saying, which plane are you getting, and I've got to say, you know what, I'm no longer doing that anymore. And it feels a bit strange. And Ukraine is one of those things where I'm not there on the ground, and I'm feeling very much that I'm not there because I otherwise would be. And so I feel that my insight into it is limited by not being on the ground and not being able to see things from that point of view. However, from the point of view of the JC, we've been covering it via a number of correspondents. In particular, John Sweeney, the former BBC guy, has been on the ground for us in Kiev, and he's been doing some reporting. And I think from a Jewish point of view, I mean, this is a very, very complicated situation. It's a very Jewish war. There are Jews on, obviously, President Zelensky is Jewish. There's a massive Jewish population in Ukraine, and we know the history there, which makes it all the more complicated. There's also a Jewish population in Russia, and Israel triangulating the two puts Jews as a whole in a very interesting and difficult position, whereby British Jews have a different perspective to Israeli Jews and so on and so forth. But I think that the thing that really comes across to me is the bravery of Jews. I mean, having covered it from a Jewish angle this time round at the JC, I mean, the bravery of Zelensky is not in doubt. I don't even need to talk about that. But also the bravery of Israeli diplomats being there on the ground and not fleeing, but really remaining and staying in the field longer than other diplomats. The bravery of Israel in making the efforts that it's made to bring Jews over by way of Aliyah, and not least the bravery of Jewish fighters in Ukraine. We've done a few pieces on the Frum fighters on the front lines, and some of them are Frum. We've had pictures of beards and Kalashnikovs, and last and not least the bravery of the humanitarian effort by Ukrainians and others in that country. I mean, John Sweeney's dispatched for us this week, which you can read if you buy a copy of the JC, which I'm sure you will, talks about being in the Kiev Central Synagogue, which has now become a humanitarian place, and seeing exhausted refugees coming into the synagogue, starving and exhausted, tired and displaced, with children, and being given food and eating it in front of the Arona Kodesh, in the actual shul. I haven't come across any accounts of Jews who have shied away or who have sought to avoid engagement, or who have, every account has been one of bravery, whether that's, fighting, humanitarian effort from the outside or from the inside. And I think that is, for me, the thing that's really come across from covering the war from the perspective of the Jewish Chronicle.
That's a really interesting take on things, and I wanted to thank you for your bravery as well in covering all the stories you've covered, and I guess in this new leadership role in representing our community and reporting on our community and our interests, it often will take a lot of gallantry and courage to do that job. So thank you to you for what you do for the Jewish community, and thanks everyone for tuning in. It's been a fascinating discussion, and it's been really enlightening, and really appreciate your time, Jake. I know that you're busy this evening at another event, and thanks very much for sparing us the time so you can give us your unique insights into all of these issues, which are really current and fascinating to us. So thank you, Jake.
Well, thank you very much, Johnny, and thank you everyone for listening. I must say that I'm not entirely at peace with the idea of my bravery being placed alongside those of the Ukrainians and so forth, but I'm doing my job and I'm having a go, and that's all I can say. So thank you very much, Johnny, and thanks everyone else, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Jake, and thanks for tuning in, everyone. See you next time, and be well, and good evening from us. All the best.